One Piece has taken an unexpected yet delicious turn. This fight is pure joy, like taking your overly leveled character and replaying an early game boss. Plus Vegapunk is on the move, Kizaru is on the way, and Sentomaru is on the floor, as well as quite possibly the biggest reveal regarding devil fruits thus far in the series. But first things first, our boy is hungry. Luffy, when engaged in fight battling mode, has a bit of a tendency to become an absolute savage, attempting to solve his problems in the only way he really knows how, by consuming them for sustenance. And he just looks so menacing when he goes in for the chomp on Lucci. Like, this isn't just Luffy having fun. There's a slight hint in his expression of, yeah, I'm gonna eat ya. It's quite sinister. And I'm sure it's been pointed out elsewhere, but it gives me some very solid Gigantamax Gengar vibes. But what I love most about this is that this isn't actually an unexpected tactic from Luffy. In fact, he's tried to eat several of his opponents in the past. And it actually worked on one occasion where he ate his way through Charlotte Cracker, but of course this technique was pioneered in Luffy's initial match with Crocodile, the Gomu Gomu no Baku Baku, where he just took Crocodile's upper body right off. Fun fact though, a lot of people don't pick up on this, but this technique was directly inspired by Luffy's encounter with Wapol, and it's even named directly after his devil fruit, the Baku Baku no Mi. So Luffy saw how Wapol thought and was like, damn, this guy gets it. But the whole exchange between Luffy and Lucci was nothing short of spectacular. And the kind of crazy choreography on display reminds me of when you're playing with toys as a child. Oda in these fight scenes is very much enjoying himself every bit as much as Luffy is. And as an author, it must feel pretty damn good to reach a pinnacle in your story where you have complete freedom to make whatever you want happen and not break the world whilst doing so. Now, there were also some sneaky references in this fight, again calling us back to Enisobi. Specifically when we heard Lucci's monologue about how, oh no, I'm a cat and I'm losing consciousness. That is a very direct callback to chapter 422, right after Lucci became the victim of Luffy's biggest fisting to date with Gear 3rd. One small detail that you may have missed though is that it looks like Luffy is dominating 100% of this fight, but there is one section where Lucci appears to get the better of him. Although the reason why you may not notice is because it happened off screen. But we cut to a collision with a yelling noise and then all we see is a hole in the wall in the shape of Luffy's body, very Looney Tunes style. And what I love about that is you don't actually need to see what happened there. The story is perfectly conveyed by that one hilarious panel. However, as for a story I do think we did maybe need to see, let's talk a bit about Sentomaru. Because he starts and finishes this chapter in the exact same position, which is face down in a pool of liquid failure, which I imagine consists of blood and saliva and probably some urine. This is a very classic One Piece fan-based discussion, but in this case, I don't think I'm a fan of having him beaten off screen, because we leave him to do his sacrificial hero thing, and then just cut back to him in his favorite position on the floor. I'm fully prepared to admit that this may just be a me thing, but this is Sentomaru we're talking about. As much as he definitely hasn't been a major focus of the story, he was a pretty big deal pre-time skip. In fact, he was the roadblock that caused the Straw Hats to split up. And maybe if we'd had a bit more of him in other parts of the story, I'd be okay. But I was really hoping for more than just seeing him get thwacked in the tum-tum and effectively being removed from combat before he even began to participate in said combat. I mean, I suppose what it does go to serve is Lucci. The fact that he can, and look, I don't want to use the word penetrate because that's a bit sexual, but the fact that he can circumvent the world's greatest defense, that is a pretty big thing, and it catapults Luffy back into the sphere of mildly decent power. With that said, I think you could probably add this fight to those YouTube compilations of cats knocking stuff over on surfaces, because that is essentially what Luffy versus Sentomaru amounted to. Now, the most interesting part about this chapter for me was listening to an old man talk about fruit, and for this alone, I would just like to take a moment to praise One Piece in general. A lot of shonen really struggle with exposition, especially from characters who don't, engage in the fight battling. But One Piece very consistently hypes me up more than anything to hear this wacky applehead go on at great length about completely fictional science. I would gladly sit in a lecture hall just listening to Vegapunk talk about the world. And in this case, what he breaks down is the entire world of artificial devil fruits. Zoan fruits can be pretty much perfectly replicated, I would say within 99.9% accuracy, accounting for that 0.1% error in color. Colors seem to be very difficult. In fact, the very concept of blue proved more challenging than constructing a mythical dragon that probably never existed. Vegapunk also implies that yes, we can engineer entire mythical zones, but the resources required would be pretty extreme. In this panel, by the way, we get treated to a fruit collage where you can see Kaido's fruit, Yamato's fruit, and even the tip of Orochi's Franky's devil fruit. Just the tip for Orochi, although to his credit there, that is still further than he ever got with Komurasaki. Meanwhile, Paramecia fruit replication seems to work pretty much smack bang the way I've been proposing, whereby it's not possible to replicate the actual fruits themselves, but instead what happens is that Vegapunk analyzes the code of the user's lineage factor and then replicates that code through his own system of new blood that was invented specifically for this purpose. Just say that again. The dude invented his own blood. And my own personal headcanon for that right now is that the blood is only green because Vegapunk failed to replicate the color red. However, this led to a very touching moment with Franky because my poor emotional cyborg genuinely thought that his best buddy Senor Pink had departed from this world before they got a chance to catch up and talk about women, or I guess woman specifically, but I really liked this. I mean, it's played for comic effect because it's Franky, but I just love that he made a friend. The other Straw Hats form bonds all the time, especially Luffy, but Franky's usually just sort of isolated in the background being weird, and it makes me want to see a one-shot sequel special. Like, let's say after One Piece ends, we have a 50-page chapter featuring the adventures of Franky and Senor Pink. And I'm incredibly glad that Mr. Hardboiled is confirmed to be alive, which I think is a more reliable method of extracting fruit abilities. Because sure, you could kill the users, but then you would have to be pretty damn sure what kind of fruit the ability is going to move into next, and if you mess up, then well, hell, you've just lost that power. So yeah, probably better to keep them in a state of perpetual torture whilst you give that power to a bioengineered shark. But something I've been most curious about are the Logia fruits, which as of right now are completely unable to be replicated. I mean, I say completely, Vegapunk clearly did with the lasers, but are mostly unable to be replicated, which is fascinating because that would imply that they manipulate a part of the body beyond changing the lineage factor. Because if it was just a different code, then surely you would just code the code. I mean, look, I am not a science, I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but when it comes to fictional science, no, it is not. So my conclusion is that the very nature of what a Logia power does to a consumer must be quite different, meaning that the most evolutionary advanced human Adonis on this island is currently Caribou, because he is the only one whose power cannot be scientifically replicated, and good on him. But we also have big information regarding the Seraphim. S-Snake in this chapter actually speaks, which is huge, because it implies that these beings have personalities and wills of their own, which is something that we'd previously not necessarily had displayed. Although thinking about it, the Seraphim that we've encountered so far are definitely the less talkative half of the Warlords. I mean, you've got Kuma, Jinbei, and Mihawk, the three kings of stoic silence. If you put all three of them in a room together, it would be quieter than a mime taking a shit in a cupboard. So it makes sense that their Seraphim don't speak unless absolutely necessary. But it does give us a lot of hope going forward, because sure, they might be easy to control as children, but in a series so focused on willpower, I can't imagine that these particular characters would remain so obedient. I mean, the 7 Warlords contain some of the strongest personalities that this series has to offer. In fact, 2 of them even have Conqueror's Haki. They were born to rule, not that. And if their clones are anything close to their original personalities, then this is going to cause the world government big problems eventually. Back to fruit though, S-Snake is confirmed to have the Mera powers, which I think is going to cause alarm bells to go off for some people, because those powers with Boa Hancock are pretty directly correlated to lust and, the general wanting to doing of things to her. However, I think that this is what we've previously speculated, that the fruit takes advantage of the core feeling generated by the user, and in the case of S-Snake, that's probably more along the lines of innocent cuteness, which we do actually have some precedent for in the series. For example, on Dressrosa, Vice Admiral Suda Squad was put under a cuteness spell after encountering Mancherry, which wasn't weird at all until this woman made it weird with her tongue out, I suppose implying that she wants to eat Princess Mancherry. But everyone affected by the powers of S-Snake is probably going to be looked at pretty unfavorably by certain segments of our community, and all I can really hope is that Sanji never encounters S-Snake, because that boy is probably getting petrified and we would never hear the end of it. What I found more adorable than S-Snake was actually S-Bear using the miniature Ursa shock. It was devastatingly cute, like a tsunami with googly eyes. But more importantly, it shows the incredible threat that they represent. Because even as children, these Seraphim are all fighting at pretty much the top level, and completely without Haki either. So if they do reach adulthood, I could certainly see them being undisputedly the world's strongest living beings. Something I think is very underrated though is the last page of the chapter, or the last 2 pages I guess. It's very simple, but it's very effective the way that Oda breaks down all of the different factions. Almost like a recap of where everyone stands, quite literally. Which I appreciate because One Piece can often get very convoluted regarding who is where, who they're wearing with, and what they're doing and the where that they are. I mean, less so in arcs like Egghead and more so in arcs like Wano and Dressrosa. But still, I like that these 2 pages are just like Straw Hats here, other Straw Hats here, CP0 there, Marines somewhere over here. And just on that last part, Kizaru's dialogue was very ominous here, and it seems like he's preparing for a full-on proper assault, which he should be given that he is up against an emperor and his crew. It's very bold when you think about it. After all of that concern about, oh no, I accidentally lead a whole war, that is exactly what Kizaru is about to do. And my personal hope is that Egghead Island will be surrounded by marine ships. Surrounded by the point where there's nowhere to go but up, up, up into space. Because I've been going back and forth on this, but it really is starting to look like Egghead Island itself is unsalvageable. The Marines are going to claim it, take the Seraphim, achieve tactical dominance, and with the only X factor remaining being Bartholomew Kuma. Now, as much as I did enjoy this chapter, I will say that it didn't really do much that 1069 hadn't already done. And in the end, we're in pretty much the exact same narrative position as before. 1069 ended up with us resolving to take Vegapunk away, CP0 taking command of the Seraphim, Kizaru incoming and Sentomaru on the floor. Whereas chapter 1070 ended with us resolving to take Vegapunk away, CP0 taking command of the Seraphim, Kizaru incoming and Sentomaru on the floor. I guess I'd call it a sequel chapter. 1070 did everything 1069 did, but bigger, which isn't a bad thing. I still found it incredibly enjoyable, especially Luffy versus Lucci, which was also something that 1069 did. I just find it very interesting how similar they are, to the point where all of the thumbnails I used for the last chapter would still be highly relevant to use for this one. However, one mega thing that 1070 did was actually first up on the cover page, finally revealing the full makeup of Mads in all of its weirdly nerdy and violent-some glory. And there is so much to dissect about this group, especially that mystery member there, who I suspect we've already met, and we're going to get into all of that in the next video.